Girl, Woman, Other. Chapter 1. Amma, Yaz, Dominique. Amma. Amma is walking along the promenade of the waterway that bisects her city as it heads east past Waterloo Bridge towards the dome of St. Paul's. She feels the sun begin to rise, the air still breezy before the city clogs up with heat and fumes. Amma's play, The Last Amazon of Dahomey, opens at the National tonight. She thinks back to when she started out in theatre, when she and her running mate Dominique developed a reputation for heckling shows that offended their political sensibilities. Amma then spent decades on the fringe, a renegade lobbing hand grenades at the establishment that excluded her, until the first female artistic director assumed the helm at the National 3 years ago. Amma takes a sip of her customary Americano as she approaches the brutalist grey arts complex ahead. Years ago, she expected to be evicted as soon as she dared walk through its doors, a time when people really did wear their smartest clothes to the theatre. She wants people to bring their curiosity to her plays, doesn't give a damn what they wear. Her own sod-all style has evolved. Year-round, her peroxide dreadlocks are trained to stick up like candles on a birthday cake. Silver hoop earrings, chunky African bangles, and pink lipstick are her perennial style statement. Yaz recently described her style as a mad old woman look, mum. She knows full well that Amma will always be anything but normal. And as she's in her 50s, she's not old yet. Try telling that to a 19-year-old. In any case, ageing is nothing to be ashamed of. Amma isn't ready to forego cigarettes, so leans on the riverside wall and lights one, hates herself for it. 40 years of first nights, and she's still bricking it. What if she's slated by the critics? What was the National thinking, allowing this rubbishy imposter into the building? She's written 15 plays and directed over 40. Of course she knows she's not an imposter. Oh, shut up, Amma. You're a veteran battle axe, remember? At times like these, Amma misses Dominique, who absconded to America. They should be sharing her breakthrough career moment together. They met in the 80s at an audition for a feature film set in a women's prison. Where else? Both were disillusioned at being put up for the parts such as slave, servant, prostitute, nanny, or crim. Look at me, Dominique said. And Amma did. There was nothing subservient, maternal, or criminal about her. Uber cool, totally gorgeous, taller than most women, thinner than most women, with cut glass cheekbones and smoky eyes. Can't they see I'm a living goddess? Amma was shorter, with African hips and thighs. Perfect slave girl material, one director told her. Amma realised she had found a kindred spirit in Dominique, who would kick ass with her. Dominique had guessed her own sexual preferences from puberty. She tried boys a couple of times. They enjoyed it. She endured it. Age 16, aspiring to be an actress, she headed for London. She went on a mission to educate herself, walked into Sister Right in Islington, read the whole of Homegirls, a black feminist anthology in weekly instalments, standing up. The bookseller didn't seem to mind. When I was accepted into a very orthodox drama school, I challenged them on everything, Amma. You're here to become an actor, not a politician. You'll be asked to leave if you keep causing trouble. Shut up or get out, right? Amma replied. I get my fighting spirit from my dad, Kwabena, who was a journalist campaigning for independence in Ghana until he heard he was going to be arrested for sedition. Legged it over here, ended up working on the railway where he met Mum at London Bridge Station. Mum, Helen, is half-caste, born in 1935 in Scotland. Her father was a Nigerian student who vanished as soon as he finished his studies at the University of Aberdeen. Mum hoped to spend their first date at her favourite spot, Club Afrique, in Soho. Instead, he took her to one of his socialist meetings where men talked independence politics. They married and moved to Peckham. I was their last child and first girl, Amma explained. My 3 older brothers became lawyers and a doctor. His only concern for me is marriage and children. Dad's a socialist who wants a revolution for mankind, literally. I tell Mum she married a patriarch, is complicit in a system that oppresses all women. She says human beings are complex. I tell her not to patronise me. She's never complained about her lot, sure signs she's oppressed. He'd said affection was an English affectation when she tried to hold his hand. Yet every year he gets her the soppiest Valentine card, listens to sentimental country music albums by Jim Reeves and Charlie Pride, wiping tears away. He doesn't know I'm a dyke, are you kidding? Mum told me not to tell him. Dad has no time for the fairies and laughs at all the homophobic jokes comedians tell on the telly. Amma spoke about going to her first black women's group in Brixton in her last year at school. The woman, Elaine, who opened the door, sported a perfect halo of an afro and smooth limbs in tight denim. Amma wanted her on sight. She listened as they debated what it meant to be a black woman, what it meant when white feminist organisations made them feel unwelcome. At the end of the first evening, Amma offered to stay behind to help Elaine wash up the cups and ashtrays. They made out on one of the bumpy sofas in the glow of the streetlight to the accompaniment of police sirens herring by. It was the closest she'd come to making love to herself. It was another coming home. The next week, when she went to the meeting, Elaine was canoodling with another woman and blanked her completely. She never went again. Amma and Dominique decided they needed to start their own theatre company. Scribbled down names. Bush Women Theatre Company best captured their intentions. They would create theatre on their own terms. It became the company's motto, on our own terms, or not at all. 6 months after its inception, they were constantly at loggerheads. Amma called a make-or-break meeting. Dominique admitted she got more pleasure from setting up tours than putting herself in front of an audience. Amma admitted she loved writing, hated admin. Was she any good as an actor? Dominique became the company manager, Amma the artistic director. Amma supplemented her income working in a burger bar in Piccadilly Circus. She moved into a series of squalid squats until she found herself living in the most desirable squat in the whole of London, Freedomia, a Soviet-sized former office block at the back of King's Cross. Amma managed to claim a typing pool so large she could jog around it, a room big enough for parties and for people to crash the disco beats of Donna Summer, Shaka Khan and Minnie Riperton. Got her parties going. Roberta, Sarah, Edith, Etta and Mathilde Santing were the soundtracks to her end-of-night seductions. She worked her way through many of the women of Freedomia. She wanted one-night stands. Most wanted more than that. Groupies queued up for Amma and Dominique as the main players of Bush Women Theatre. Everyone from baby dykes to women who could be their mothers. Amma learnt to head all women off, to state her intention up front, to never sleep with the same person twice, even when she wanted to. Sex was a simple, harmless human pleasure, and until her late 30s, she got a lot of it. How many? 100? Another 50? Surely not more than that. Amma long ago lost interest in bed hopping. Non-monogamous relationships are her thing, or is it called polyamory now? The middle-aged Amma sometimes feels nostalgic for her younger days. Amma throws her coffee in the bin and walks directly towards the theatre. She enters the stage door and makes her way through the corridors and up the stairs and eventually onto the cavernous stage. Over 1,000 people will fill the seats this very evening. The Last Amazon of Dahomey, written and directed by Amma Bonsu. Where in the 18th century women warriors served the king, lived in the king's compound, and were preceded by a slave girl warning men to look away or be killed, who were not otherwise permitted sexual relationships. Amma decided they must have been at it among themselves, and the idea of her play was born. Amma wishes Dominique could have flown over to see a play she was the first to read 10 years ago. When Dominique left, she dismantled Bush Women Theatre and went freelance. Shirley, her oldest friend, will be here tonight. She attended every one of Amma's shows since she was a teenager, a constant in her life since they met as 11-year-olds at grammar school. Hello, my name is Shirley. Do you want me to be your friend? They were inseparable after that. Shirley never had a negative word to say about her sexuality, covered for her when she bunked off school, listened avidly to her smoking, snogging, drinking, acting, in that order, tales from the youth theatre. Even when their paths forked after school, Shirley into teaching, Amma into theatre, they maintained their friendship. Shirley babysat Yaz. Shirley lent Amma money to pay off her debts. It felt one way until Amma reasoned. She made Shirley's life more interesting and scintillating. Then there was Amma's squad. Mabel, who went straight once she hit her 30s, the first black barber-wearing housewife of the Shires. Olivine, uncastable in Britain, who landed a major crime series in Hollywood. Lakshmi, saxophonist, who denounced chord progressions for microtonal improvisation. Sylvester, who still ran his socialist theatre company, the 97%, which toured to fringe venues and hard-to-reach communities. Amma was grateful she had become a homeowner late in life, at a time when she was practically homeless. After her parents died, her successful older brothers kindly gave her the greatest share of the family home in Peckham, which paid for a substantial deposit on a small terraced house on Railton Road in Brixton, a place to call her own. Yaz was born 19 years ago in a birthing pool in Amma's candle-lit living room, surrounded by incense, the music of lapping waves, a doula and midwife, Shirley and Roland. Roland, her great friend who'd agreed to father her child when the death of her parents had triggered an all-consuming broodiness. Amma misses her daughter now she's away at university. The house breathes differently when Yaz isn't there. She hopes she comes home after university. Most of them do these days, don't they? Yaz can stay forever. Really. Yaz. Yaz sits on the seat chosen by her mum, Amma, in the middle of stalls, one of the best in the house, although she'd rather be hidden away at the back in case the play is another embarrassment. 2 members of her uni squad are seated on either side of her, Warris and Courtney. Hard workers like Yaz, because they are all determined to get good degrees, because without it, they're stuffed. They're all stuffed anyway, they agree, unless they wrest intellectual control from their elders, sooner rather than later. Yaz is reading English literature and plans to be a journalist with her own controversial column in a globally read newspaper. Warris, from Wolverhampton, is reading politics and wants to become an MP to represent a la Barack major role model, Obama. Courtney, from Suffolk, is reading American Studies because she's really into African American men. The theatre is predominated by the usual greyheads, average age 100. Mum's friends and die-hard fans are dotted all over. Yaz looks over at Sylvester, scruffy as hell in his tatty blue communist china overalls, scowling like he really wants to not enjoy the play. Mum says Sylvester should stop sniping at other people's success. You mean the way you felt not so long ago, Mum? Ever since she landed the national gig, she's got very snooty about struggling theatre mates. As for Dad, you can call me Roland. No, you're my dad, Dad. He's sitting a couple of rows in front of her, wearing one of his Oswald Boateng suits, brilliant blue on the outside, purple satin on the inside. Dad's budget in clothes could pay her university fees for a year, the very fees he says he can't afford. Every so often he casually glances around to see who recognises him off the telly. Dad. Dr. Roland Corti, the country's first professor of modern life at the University of London, author of the New York Times and Sunday Times best-selling trilogy How We Lived Then, 2000, How We Live Now, 2008, and How We Will Live in the Future, 2014. He's become a media whore, Mum opines. He was such a great guy before he was corrupted by celebrity. Funnily enough, when Mum watches him on the telly, she begrudgingly agrees with pretty much everything he says. Kenny, godfather number 2, who wisely sends Yaz birthday checks, is sitting loyally next to Dad. He did ask her to be a little less negative towards Dad the other day. I just can't help it, Kenny. Once I come out all lovable on the other side of my cynical teenage years, I'll let you know. Kenny cracked up at that. Yaz wishes the play had already opened to 5-star universal acclaim, because she'll have to deal with the aftermath if it's slagged off by the critics. Mum will go on an emotional rampage that might last weeks. Yaz has a massive poster of Hendrix in her room, the largest in her block at uni on account of the extreme claustrophobia and social anxiety stunt she pulled to get it. She thought she'd find romance at uni, a nice guy who doesn't look like the back of a bus and is taller than her, prerequisite. Anyway, she's resigned herself to hanging out with the squad at uni rather than going out manhunting. She's coming of age as one of the swipe-like chat invite generation where men expect you to give it up on the first and only date. Even though she's considered reasonably attractive with her own unique style, part 90s goth, part post-hip-hop, part slutty-ho, part alien, she's having to compete with images of girls with collagen pouts and their bloated silicone tits out. Yaz sometimes spends her sleepless nights worrying she'll be alone for the whole of her life. Nanette, the third member of the squad, is engaged to Kadim, who's studying in America. Her parents chose him for her. 3/4 of the squad don't drink much at all. Yaz's mind is her most valuable asset, and she's not going to mess with it. Warris is dating Ina, a Somali Norwegian boy, both big anime fans. Warris draws cartoons and is developing a female Somali superhero. She says yes to the hijab and sex outside marriage, no to booze and pork. Nanette expects to start drinking after a few years of marriage when Kadim takes his first official mistress. Amir Diab evenings became their thing, dancing to the songs of the famous Egyptian singer late into the evening in Yaz's room. Courtney, who lived next door, had knocked on the door in her pyjamas and asked them to turn it down because she was trying to sleep and it's like midnight. Yaz told her to listen very carefully to the other people playing loud music. Everyone's at it, right? So why are you targeting us in particular? Giving Courtney a look rich in subtext. A tense moment diffused by Nanette, who welcomed Courtney into Yaz's room, and when the music began again, showed her moves. Soon she was moving better than all of them. They all crashed on Yaz's floor that night, had breakfast together in the refectory. Courtney made the mistake of asking Warris why she wore a headscarf. Warris simply said her mother told her she didn't need to explain herself to anyone. I was only asking because I didn't know. Cool. Well, now you do. Yaz decided that although Courtney was quite ignorant of cultures, she'd shown strength of character and chutzpah. She liked Courtney, and if she liked her, she was in the squad. And so it begins. The last Amazon of Dahomey. The play. Dominique. Dominique came across Nzinga at Victoria Station in the rush hour as she was being knocked down by the steamrolling effect of London's ruthless commuters. When Nzinga was once more upright and composed, Dominique found herself in front of an extraordinary vision. Her skin glowed, her robes flowed, her features were sculptural, lips fulsome, thin ropes of dreadlocks fell freely down to her hips, silver amulets and bright beads sewn into them. Dominique offered to buy her a coffee, confident she'd say yes, because lesbians, and she suspected this one was, usually did. Nzinga's accent evoked the sensory delights of warm cornbread, sticky ribs, collard greens, and other foods she'd read about in novels by African-American women. She was on her way back from a pilgrimage to Ghana, visiting Elmina's castle, where captured Africans had been incarcerated before being shipped to America as slaves. All the painful history of slavery entered my body, and I broke down and sobbed. Dominique realised more than ever that the white man has a lot to answer for. Dominique stopped herself from replying that the African man had also sold Africans into slavery, so it was a lot more complex than that. Nzinga was a builder of timber houses on women's lands in the disunited states of America, had risen above the tragedy of a terrible childhood to become, Dominique felt, magnificent, a zami, a sexy sister, an inspiration, a phenomenon exuding warmth and experience. Dominique wanted to curl into this woman and be looked after by her. They slept together the day they met and every night thereafter. "It's so sublime, it's spiritual," Dominique raved to Amma. "I've fallen in love properly for the first time in my life with the most wonderful woman I've ever met, who desires me from a position of inner strength, Amma. But that's new to me and darned sexy. I feel helpless and dominated, which I like, whereas my previous lovers desired me from a position of weakness, of adoration." Amma replied that this Nzinga must be something else to turn the coolest dyke of us all into a love-struck teenager. How on earth had that happened? At the end of their summer of love, Dominique, cowardly, told Amma on the phone she'd been issued with an ultimatum by Nzinga. Either she goes to the US with her, or we go our separate ways. "Don't go with that woman, Dominique. Don't go." But having found real love, Dominique followed it to America. Dominique, the drinking, drug-dabbling, chain-smoking, lesbian feminist, carnivorous clubber who produced theatre by women, became a teetotal, vegan, non-smoking, radical feminist lesbian house builder on women's land called Spirit Moon, which allowed only lesbians to reside there. The two of them were allocated a log cabin at the furthest reaches of the estate. In front of them were fields, behind was beach, birch and maple forest, an idyllic, isolated corner. How could Amma have wanted to deny her this experience? Nzinga was her soulmate, a total, one-off goddess. Why couldn't Amma see that? The first week they were invited to a buffet at the house of Gaia, who owned the estate, a sprawling ranch house with high ceilings and no images of any men, anywhere. Dominique chatted freely. Nzinga stayed in her seat on the veranda all night, grim-faced. When Dominique looked over, she noticed Nzinga monitoring her every movement. "We have to go." "Really?" They walked back to their house in the dark. Nzinga was quiet for a while, then declared it was better if we don't socialize anymore. Once is enough. I can only take so much of their fake friendship. "Why are we here if you're so critical of them?" Dominique asked. "Because I don't want to live in a man's world." "With me you're safe," Nzinga said, although Dominique wasn't feeling particularly unsafe. "With me you're complete," although Dominique wasn't feeling particularly incomplete. "With me you're home, because home is a person, not a place." Nzinga said she'd been thinking about renaming Dominique as Sojourner, after Sojourner Truth, the anti-slavery activist. "I like my name. So keep it. I'll call you Sojourner anyway, darling." A few months in, and they were arguing more than Dominique ever had in her life. Nzinga never saw herself as less than faultless. Why did Nzinga think that being in love with her meant Dominique had to give up her independence and submit completely? She felt like an altered version of herself, her mind foggy, emotions primal, senses heightened. She wanted to talk this out with a friend, Amma, most of all. Decided it wasn't worth the hassle when she sent 3 letters to Amma. Never heard back. She once suggested phoning Amma long distance from the post office, and Nzinga sank into a terrible funk for days. Dominique never mentioned it again. Dominique began to regret allowing Nzinga to make every decision for her. Why should she wear her hair almost shaved to the scalp? Why shouldn't she talk to the gentle community baker when she went to collect bread in the morning? Don't you realize that people want to sabotage our grey love affair? That doesn't make sense. It's taking things too far. Why don't you shut your goddamn mouth? The day Nzinga punched Dominique on the arm was the day she thought she'd leave. Reasoned it was a one-off, discovered it wasn't when a single punch progressed into multiple ones. It was a Saturday morning. Nzinga had headed into town to do the weekly shop, when Gaia appeared outside their home. "We're concerned about what's happening here," Gaia said. "Is everything okay? We know what she's like. You can talk to me." In betraying Nzinga, she was at last true to herself. Gaia comforted her. "We will help you get away, okay? We'll come by this time next Saturday and drive you to the airport." It took years for Dominique to stop beating herself up for staying with Nzinga for as long as she did, nearly 3 years. Dominique fell in love with the West Coast, entered into a marriage of convenience with a gay man, got her first job working in admin for a film company. She invited Amma to visit, who never said an outright, "I told you so." Dominique moved to America nearly 30 years ago. She considers it her home. Carol walks through Liverpool Street Station with its intergalactic glass and steel ceiling propped up by towering Corinthian columns. She passes underneath the timetable board, listing departures and arrivals as announcements bellow from the clustered boom boxes, informing passengers about platform numbers and the numerous delays due to vandalism on the tracks, or leaves on the line, or sun on the line, or a body under a train. How very inconsiderate, not to her, to choose such a brutal and dramatic finale. Carol knows what drives people to such despair, knows what it's like to appear normal but to feel herself swaying. Just one leap away. Just one leap away from eternal peace. These days, however, she feels very much alive, looking forward, as they say at work, to the next window of opportunity. Look at her. Her perfectly tailored city clothes, eyebrows plucked with calligraphic flair, her discreet, no-nonsense jewellery of platinum and pearls. Carol, whose daily lexicon revolves around the orbit of equities, futures and financial modelling, she's headed for an early morning meeting with a new client whose net worth is multiple times the GDP of the world's poorest countries. She's thinking he better not look at her as if she should be attached to a trolley bearing flasks of coffee, assortments of teas, and those individually packed corporate biscuits. She will stride up to the client, shake his hand firmly, yet femininely, delivering her name unto him with perfectly clipped received pronunciation as he adjusts to the collision between reality and expectation. It's all about having the upper hand with Carol. Today she will force herself to project a positive approach to her meeting. Her shelves are stacked with motivational books ordered from America. So what will her meeting be? Fan-bloody-tastic. Come on, delete all negative thoughts, Carol. Look to the future with positivity. Life is an adventure to be embraced with an open mind and loving heart. But there was that one time, at the start of her career, in a country known for its terrible record on human rights, even though she told them she was there to meet a team from their national bank. Even her body was invaded, as if she were an impoverished mule with 1/2 kilo of white powder stuffed up her fanny. The invasion of alien hands, while another grubby immigration official in a sweat-stained blue uniform looked on. It brought back such memories that had lain dormant for years after it happened, when Carol was 13 and a half at her first party at Letitia's place. Carol hadn't hitherto been interested in boys, was labelled super geek of Year 9, preferring the mind-bending pleasures of mathematical problem-solving, inspired by her mother Bumi, who was raising her alone after her father died. The night before Letitia's party, dinner of pounded yam and bitter leaf soup in a shared wooden bowl, perched 32 floors up in a tower block, Mama wears a house wrapper with faded orange blooms knotted above her breasts. Mama, whose feet are strong and scarred from walking barefoot over forested ground. Let us wonder, Carol, at the genius of hyperbolic geometry, where the sum of the angles adds up to less than 180 degrees. Let us wonder how X was just a rare letter until algebra came along. Clever Mama, who taught her to send X and Y off into complicated calculations and to trust them to present her with the right conclusions. How she loved being the best at something, standing out, as she did for sure the next day at Letitia's, having convinced Mama that she was at a sleepover, when she was at a party heaving with teenagers. Letitia yelled at people not to get waved or misbehave. This ain't no joke. Except Carol was drinking for the first time in her life and quickly got totally waved. When Trey and his crew arrived, here at last were real mandem, pure buffness. She began amping it up in front of them. No one had ever looked at her the way Trey was looking at her tonight. With such an audience, she found herself spinning around and around, to Buster's growl, with the vibrations coming out of the speaker, charging around her body, until the spinning went to her feet and she keeled over, heard laughter, and serves her right for showing off, only to be rescued from total embarrassment by Trey. When she peered up at him, his grey eyes were soft as he stared deep into her soul. Love. Was this love, even though they had just met and she still felt a bit sick? You're so delicate, I need to protect you, lady. You need fresh air. He ushered her out of the front door, bundled her under his arms as if her head was a package he was carrying. When she tried to lift it, she couldn't. They went towards the short alley that led to Boxley Park, where she and Letitia had spent their childhood on the swings, over the little bridge, through the gate that used to be shut until the council gave up, replacing the padlock. They were not alone. She heard other voices. She wasn't walking no more, she was being frog-marched. Then she was flat on her back on the ground, blindfolded, her arms pinned above her head. How had her clothes come off? Then her body wasn't her own no more. It belonged to them. It was hurting, hurting, hurting. After minutes or hours or days or years or several lifetimes had passed, it stopped. You were gagging for it, and by the way, you were great. Then they were gone. And so was she. Carol never told a soul. Was it Carol's fault? She suspected it was. Shut herself in her bedroom, buried herself under her bedclothes, turned up late for school, bunked off because what was the point in learning when something like this had happened? Until one day, it was like she woke up from a bad dream and she looked down the concrete bunker corridors of her inner city comp at Letitia, who believed studying was for mugs, man, mugs. Chloe, who had a sideline at school as the supplier of ecstasy. Lauren, who was only interested in the next shag, and felt like she was seeing them on a screen in a documentary about a bad London comp. She saw their future and hers as baby mothers pushing prams, forever scrabbling down the side of the sofas for change to feed the meter, like Mum, shopping in Poundland, like Mum. Not me. Not me. Not me, she told herself. I shall fly above and beyond. She decided to prove the teachers who'd given up on her wrong, especially Mrs. Shirley King, who'd marked her out as very promising, who had blanked her once she started bunking off. Mrs. King was an old bat, the school dragon, but who else to ask for help now that Carol knew she wanted to do better? She took the plunge, asked her for advice about which subjects she'd need to study for the best careers, was surprised to be obliged on all counts, on strict conditions. She never skipped another day, never turned up late, did her homework on time, and you must change your social circle, Carol. Social circle? What the hell was that, even? Mrs. King, who harassed her for 4 years. Mrs. King, who unfairly took all the credit when Carol scored a starry set of alpha grades in all her GCSEs and was called to interview a year later to study maths at Oxford University. Carol arrived at the ancient university via bus, tube, train, and a long walk from the station on her own. Her mother couldn't get the day off work, which was just as well. That first week she counted on one hand the number of brown-skinned people in her college, and none as dark as her. In the baronial dining hall, she overheard loud reminiscences about Christmas holidays in Goa, gap years spent building a school for the poor in Kenya, house parties in the countryside, long weekenders in Paris, Prague, Vilnius. Where was that, even? The really posh ones were the loudest. They made her feel crushed, worthless, a nobody, without saying a word to her, without even noticing her. At the end of her first term, she returned to Peckham, informing her mother that she didn't want to return to university. "I'm done, Mama, I'm done." Which kind nonsense be this?" Bummy shouted. "Listen to me good, Carol Williams. Did me and Papa come to this country for a better life, only to see our daughter giving up on her opportunities and end up distributing paper hand towels for tips in a nightclub toilet? You must go back and fight the battles that are your British birthright, Carol, as a true Nigerian." Carol returned to college and resolved to conquer. She would fit in. She studied the inmates to find the best match for her, approached those with the most friendly demeanours, was surprised when people responded warmly. Carol listened and learned from her new social circle, amended herself to become not quite them, just a little more like them. She was invited into family homes without carpets on the floor, out of choice, with a preference for old and decrepit things, such as grandfather clocks that rattled and antique wardrobes that suffered from woodworm, dining tables that displayed generations of graffiti vandalism, such as "Esme loves Jonty, who loves Poppy, who loves Monty, who loves Jasper, who loves Clarissa, who loves Marissa, who loves Priscilla, who loves Clemency," or something like that. She was introduced to the concept of walking just for pleasure. This morning, Carol exits Liverpool Street Station and takes the long way around to her place of work in order to get just a little bit more exercise in, even though she went for her daily jog from Fulham to Hammersmith, as she does every morning, while Freddie is snug in bed. She runs for her life because to slip up is giving in to failure, to inertia, to feeling sorry for herself about that moment in her life which still creeps to the front of her memory when she least expects it. Carol stops for a while, looks out of the glass wall onto the undulating wave of the Millennium Bridge. Far off in the distance, she sees a plane begin its descent into City Airport, probably passing over her childhood estate in Peckham. She wonders what happened to Letitia. Probably a baby mother now, or a gang leader, or banged up, or all three. She allows her gaze to travel south along the river path that leads towards the National Theatre, opening an all-female production this very night about black lesbian warriors. According to Freddie, he has tickets, insists she attends. She met Freddie at a party a couple of years into her job when she was living back home with her mother to save money. She was flattered that this handsome, preppy, and genuinely plummy man was interested in her, was enthralled by her childhood in Peckham. He said he had merely stepped rather casually into the grooves of a preordained track laid down by his family, was offered a well-remunerated starter position in the city as a result of his mother calling in a favour from a school friend. No interview necessary. He dreams of living in a wigwam in a field, growing his own food. "I'll be the house husband in the relationship," he promised. She knew she would go further faster with him at her side. He said his parents wanted him to marry someone whose lineage, like theirs, could be traced back to William the Conqueror. You should have seen their faces when I told them. Bumi. Bumi did not foresee the long-term negative impact of her daughter going to the famous university for rich people. When Bumi watched her daughter collect her degree at graduation, tears streamed down her face. She wished Augustine was there to witness their little girl making it. Before she got on the train back to London, Bumi impressed upon Carol for the umpteenth time that now she had to acquire a high-flying job and then a respectable Nigerian husband. When Carol quickly found a good job at an investment bank, Bumi was happy that she decided to stay at home to save for a mortgage. When Bumi tried to cajole her into meeting the 3 young Nigerian men she had picked out for her, "I'm not really interested at the moment," Carol replied. "Do not leave it too long. By the time you are 30, you are past it." And so everything was going along quite nicely for a couple of years. Then one morning at breakfast, Carol said, "I have something to share. I've got engaged to be married, Mother, to a wonderful man called Freddie." Bumi felt fireworks going off in her brain. "What is this?" she thought. "This girl tells me she is going to marry a man she has not yet even introduced to her mama? How long has this been going on?" "A while. Oh, and he's white. English," Carol mumbles. "We've been dating for ages and I'm really in love with him, so there you have it." "So there you have it?" Bumi tried to count to 10. She only got to 9.2 before jumping off her chair so fast, Carol sprang up too. "You don't spit on top your papa life? You don't spit on top your people? What kind shame you want bring on this family? You don't disgrace me. I no sabi you at all, at all." Bumi wished Augustine was still alive to talk sense into their girl. "Carol, listen to me. You hardly know this Freddie come lately character. Who is he to you when you are everything to me? There is no point getting on in this country if you lose who you really are. You are Nigerian first, foremost, and lastmost. Carol, you must marry a Nigerian for your poor papa's sake, Abby?" When that did not produce the required results, Bumi decided henceforth to ignore Carol, starting that very evening. Bumi hoped she was crying herself to sleep every night. Then, one morning, Carol came in, looking all English as usual, in her navy blue raincoat tied tightly to show off her reduced waist. "You'll be pleased to hear that I'm moving out and in with Freddie, Mother. You'll never have to see me again." Something shifted in that moment, and Bumi felt it was right to give her a ticket back from Coventry. It had been hard not talking to her as weeks progressed into 2 months, and nearly 3. She did not want to disown her daughter, the only person left in her life who she loved. "You are a Nigerian. No matter how high and mighty you think you are, no matter how English your future husband, no matter how English you yourself pretend to be. What is more, if you address me as mother ever again, I will beat you until you are dripping wet with blood, and then I will hang you upside down over the balcony with the washing to dry. I be your mama, now and forever. Never forget that, Abby." By the time she had finished, Carol had tracks of black mascara running down her cheek, and Bumi was grateful to once again feel the warmth of her child's body when they held each other. Bumi watched Carol as she stepped into the urine-smelling lift. Her daughter would soon belong completely to them. How she needed Augustine, the graduate teaching assistant who invited her to lunch when she was studying for her degree in mathematics at Ibadan University, who told her she was a very pretty girl when she knows for a fact she was not, who waited a long time before he tried to kiss her, With Augustine in her life, there were two halves of a circle moving towards completion. When he asked Bumi to be his wife, he reassured her that his parents would accept her even though she had no family. They prided themselves on being progressive. Bumi thought she was very lucky. Augustine did not feel so lucky. His family was not connected enough to get him a job in government. If he left for England, he was sure to find a job that would take him around the world. He settled into the seat of a minicab until he had saved enough to set himself up in business, import-export. Dear Augustine, who died of a heart attack while out driving over Westminster Bridge, transporting drunken partygoers in the early hours of New Year's Day. Bumi lost her faith the minute she walked into the chapel of rest and saw her beloved Augustine lying there in body only. She understood what she must do. She was going to become someone who employed others. Bumi needed an injection of cash for start-up costs. What to do when everybody she knew was living hand-to-mouth? Except for Bishop Adorami Obi of her church. The pastor arranged to meet her in the parlour of the old bingo hall that was now his mega-church. She gasped and groaned as if in ecstasy until he cried out, "Blessed be His Holiness! God or Hallelujah! Sister Bumi! Hallelujah!" She was now a businesswoman. This was her first transaction. She would never tell anyone how low she had gone to elevate herself and her daughter. Her first client was a lady called Penelope Halifax, who lived in one of those big houses in Camberwell. Penelope was tall, a retired schoolteacher who wore ill-fitting clothes to hide her substantial womanliness. She had been a schoolteacher at Carol's school. Bumi wanted to mention it, but the lady told her, "You're here to work, not to indulge in social intercourse." Penelope soon broke her own rule and talked non-stop to Bumi about her first husband, Giles, the sexist twat, and her god-awful second husband, Philip, who chased any randy tart behind her back. Bumi thought the woman was sophisticated on the outside and uncouth on the inside. Every week she cleared away a large supply of empty wine bottles left by the kitchen bin. By the time Carol began her banking career in the city, Bumi had a staff of 10. Letitia. Letitia Kenesha Jones walks through the fruit and veg section of the supermarket where she works as supervisor. She's chief bitch on the prowl, or Major General Mum, as her kids call her. Letitia is wearing her uniform of navy blue trousers, navy blue cardigan, and fresh white shirt, hair gel down and side parted, very smart and professional, because that is what she is now. After she crawled her way out of the horror movie of her teenage years to begin climbing the giddying heights of retail supremacy. Letitia started working for the supermarket when she left school, a head-banging, argumentative gobshite with no qualifications who wouldn't take orders from no one. Didn't see the point in studying when it didn't make you happy, as she told her teachers, especially Mrs. King. She imagined herself standing on a podium, speaking into a megaphone, inciting rebellion on a grand scale, creating utter havoc, which is what it felt like inside when Daddy left. Daddy worked in pest control for the council. It's a vocation, a calling, my contribution to the world. You understand? Weekends he topped up his income as a bouncer in a swanky nightclub. Like a UN peacekeeper. You understand? He was funny in a silly way. Daddy had long black dreadlocks and was 6'5" and just as wide. Once a year they went to Butlins at Skegness. They couldn't afford to go to the Caribbean. Mummy came from St. Lucia when she was 2 years old, grew up in Liverpool. Daddy came from Montserrat when he was 13, speaking funny and looking foreign. When he spoke patois, they thought he was thick. When he and his white friends were naughty, he alone was sent to the sin bin. When he got angry at the injustice, he was being abusive. So he decided to throw a chair at a teacher, was sent to Borstal. Once I was free, I picked myself up and made a life for myself in this country, Letitia. Put all my pent-up rage into bodybuilding. Never lost my temper with nobody ever again. So one minute it was all happy families with jokes. Then, the September she started secondary school, he left. Mummy went into meltdown, found out he'd gone abroad somewhere. Letitia sat by the living room window waiting for him to come home, the whole of that Monday night, the whole of Tuesday, the whole of Wednesday. That night she took his dressing gown from the back of the bathroom door and slept inside it. Losing her dad the way she did was something Letitia didn't talk about. She told them he died of a heart attack. She ran wild, hated school, couldn't concentrate. Then she threw the legendary party when she was 13, except her mother came home too early the next morning. Boy, she got the beats of her life that day. It was what her mother called a turning point in their relationship. Letitia called it GBH. As the hot food section manager is late today, Letitia makes her way over to the rotisserie. Rupert, usually on the fish counter, is covering for Tammy, who was fired last week, caught in the act of eating spicy chicken wings. Letitia is grateful she wasn't caught doing a lot worse when she was stacking shelves, but her excuse was more valid. It went like this. She had Jason, her first child, with Dwight, a security guard at the store. When he leaned over and whispered, "You're so fit, Letitia," that was all it took. He was the first person she told the truth about her dad's disappearance. It don't make him a bad man, though only a weak one. 'Nough mans be like that. So was Dwight, it turned out. "You're getting too intense, too much too soon. I'm not ready to settle down, you gets?" "What do you mean, too much too soon? I haven't asked you for anything." Mummy went through the roof, threw her out, ranting about Letitia bringing shame on the family. Dwight manned up for a few seconds, made sure their shifts overlapped so she could get as many things as she needed for their baby without detection. A week later, Mummy turned up to take her home. Letitia gave her the biggest hug. "Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Mummy." She met Mark in the nightclub she went to once a month with Lauren and Chloe. He was an electrician, had his own flat in Streatham, and was fresh to death. She couldn't believe her luck, and gave it up without protection in the back of his car. The only thing it led to was Jontel, who still hasn't met her father because when Letitia tried to call the number Mark gave her, it didn't exist. Trey was the father of child number 3. She remembered him from her party when him and his mandem caused a stir when they turned up. Trey asked her out on Facebook. He was topless in his profile pic, tried to look proper gangster, but his eyes were soft. She wasn't going to go all the way, just wanted to mess around. Until Trey unzipped his jeans. "Okay, Trey, I'm going to leave now," she said, in her head. Before she could object, he was inside her. She struggled to move out from under what felt like a block of concrete. "I don't want to! Not yet! Get off me, please, Trey!" she said, out loud to deaf ears. So she gave up, let him get on with it. Until he finished, lay half on top of her, fell asleep. She spent a long time in the shower, wondering if he'd done anything wrong, or was it her fault? So now she had 3 kids, Jason, Jontel, and Jordan, all before her 21st birthday. 3 kids who'd grow up with no father in their lives. This is the new Letitia, who's nearly 30 and settled on being single as long as it takes to meet a man that's right for her and her kids. This is the new Letitia, who still lives with mum and sister Jayla in the family home with Jason, 12, Jontel, 11, and Jordan, 10. Then Daddy turned up unannounced a few weeks ago. Letitia came home to find him sitting on his old armchair in the living room as if he never left it. He was just as huge, his dreadlocks more grey than black. He looked at her admiringly, lovingly, when she walked into the room. Mum didn't look like she was going to kick him out any time soon. Jordan edged towards his grandfather, who reached out and put an arm around him when he was close enough to be cuddled. Beamed. She realised her youngest son needed her father in his life. Shirley. Shirley, not yet Mrs. King, arrives at Peckham School for Boys and Girls, a former Victorian workhouse, approached by what was once called the Pauper's Path. She's wearing a light grey pencil skirt and jacket, black patent leather court shoes, and her pride. She's way too early, wanders through the empty school, explores its light-filled classrooms, imagines its essence pouring into her soul, yes, her very soul. She isn't going to be a good teacher, but a great one. Classroom walls are decorated with flowcharts and diagrams, anatomy drawings, a map of the world that makes Britain rival Africa in size, testament to the colonial cartographers who got away with it for centuries. Between the lofty windows looking out onto the playing field, Neil Armstrong walks on the moon with the caption, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Every step she takes will raise these children up. She will leave no child behind. Even little blighters like Kevin, Keith and Terry, who turned up with swastika motifs stuck to their pencil case, which she dealt with by educating them about Hitler's final solution, the shock of it triggering 100 questions. "Miss, miss, miss!" Or when race wars broke out in the classroom. "Look at this photograph of lynching in Mississippi in 1965. Yes, those children are indeed clapping and cheering. Miss, miss, miss! This, class, is what happens when prejudice gets out of hand." Shirley was praised by the headmaster as a natural teacher who goes above and beyond the call of duty, achieves excellent exam results with her exemplary teaching skills, and who is a credit to her people. Shirley felt the pressure was now on her to be a great teacher and an ambassador for every black person in the world. The staff room is stuffed with sofas, tables, coat racks and cork notice boards, studded with rotors, postcards, fire evacuation instruction, and a poster of a topless girl, barely 16, if that. Shirley endures the fug of foul-smelling smoke without complaint. Such a scruffy lot, these teachers, she thinks, sitting neatly in her prim skirts and court shoes. The bear-like John Clayton, maths, sits opposite, sporting a beard that could house a legion of lice. He's reading a newspaper, its front page emblazoned with a mugshot of a black youth, wild-eyed and menacing. Shirley wishes he'd put it away. It feels personal, embarrassing. Shirley tries not to succumb to the paranoia that comes from thinking every negative reaction is due to her skin colour, and maintains a charm offensive of politeness even to those colleagues who take against her, including Penelope Halifax, biology head of sixth, who ignores Shirley's dwindling attempts at greeting in the school corridor. Penelope, the only woman to speak up at staff meetings, whose superior voice slices through the booming alpha male teachers. Shirley abhors the fact that they're all so pathetically resigned to letting the men, and Penelope, make decisions for the rest of them. This late May afternoon, Penelope addresses the issue of the school's poor exam performance, declaring that half the kids are so thick and badly behaved they should be suspended or even expelled from school. Everyone knows which half she means. Shirley decides it's time to step up and speak out. "I disagree, Penelope. We mustn't write them off," she says, feeling her mouth dry up. "If we don't help them, who will?" A thrilled, hushed silence animates the room. Penelope doesn't disappoint. "I, for one, am not a social worker. I really think you need more than 2 terms on the job before you challenge someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Now, as I was saying..." Shirley's rants about Penelope dominate her conversations with her husband Lennox that evening, as they will many others while he is cooking a Thai chicken coconut curry in the kitchen. They've agreed he'll do the cooking, she'll do the cleaning. He'll do the shopping, she'll do the ironing. She's lucky to have him. "Intelligence is not innate, Lennox, it's acquired. In spite of what Penelope thinks, having a go at me in front of everyone, and she dares to call herself a feminist. My job as a teacher is to help those who are disadvantaged. Egalitarianism uber alles." Lennox stirs in the red curry paste and the ginger. She admires his straight back, his body contoured in all the right places, courtesy of regular gym visits. She'd wanted a man who looked like he could carry her, physically, not metaphorically, who'd treat her as equal, with sensible career plan. Solicitor, didn't drink, much, smoke, never, do drugs, only once, or gamble, not even the pools. Their hips found each other's dancing to Ken Booth and John Holt, spinning on the turntable of a basement blues in Chapeltown with wall-to-wall speakers, a pot of curry goat bubbling in the kitchen. They got to know each other over the next few months of dating. Lennox was sent by his Guyanese parents to live in Harlem with his great-aunt Myrtle, while his newly migrated parents found their feet in Leeds. Once they had earned enough, they sent for him and had 3 more children. Lennox returned to Leeds with the belief that he could do better than his parents, but soon understood that he was seen as an enemy of the nation on account of his skin colour, stopped and frisked by the cops when he was 12 and looked 15. Their parting shot, "On your way, sunshine, you're lucky this time." These days when the police try it on, I let them know I'm a lawyer and they think twice about putting their filthy hands where they don't belong. Miss Shirley Coleman eventually became Mrs. Shirley King. Her best friend is Amma. They'd become friends at New Cross Grammar School for Girls, with its pipeline to the professional classes of Blackheath rather than the sink estates of Peckham. As 11-year-olds, they were subject to the gravitational pull of being the only black girls in their year. Amma came out as lesbian to Shirley at 16. In due course, they made the decision that so long as Amma didn't fancy her, there were no signs that she did, and so long as she didn't tell anyone, it was sort of okay. Fat chance. When Amma left school, she started shouting it from the rooftops as if it was something to be proud of. Shirley had to put up with her badge-wearing friend or lose her friendship. She can't not have Amma in her life. She loves her, as a friend. Also, Shirley doesn't meet many new people, whereas Amma makes new friends from the arty world practically every day. Over time, Shirley became an experienced schoolteacher who remained committed to giving the kids a fighting chance. It was bad and got worse when the Thatcher government began to implement the Master Plan for Education. The Third Reich steamrolled in the dreaded national curriculum that curbed her own pedagogical freedoms to produce excellent results. Thank you very much. Hot on its heels were the league tables. Then Gestapo HQ enforced lesson plans, all of which left no room for responding to the fluctuating needs of a classroom of living, breathing, individualised children. What was she? A cog in the wheel of bureaucratic madness. And as the 80s became history, the 90s couldn't wait to charge in and bring more problems than solutions. By the time the new millennium pitched up, knives large enough to disembowel rhinos were discovered in school rucksacks. Gang recruitment agencies loitered outside the school gates. A bustling drug market in the school grounds replaced the tuck shop. After decades of religiously marking homework, 5 nights a week, she now loathed doing it with a venom. Piles of crap produced by mostly semi-literates who made her life hell in the classroom. Mixed-ability classrooms. To think she once approved. It didn't raise standards, it lowered them. On this, she and Penelope Halifax agreed. After many years avoiding each other, they bonded at being overlooked by the new young crowd who now ran the show. In spite of the fact that Penny was considerably older than Shirley, all ideology and no experience. Wankers. When Penelope retired, Shirley's greatest ally was gone. She wanted to leave for the private sector, wanted teacher-pleasers, girls whose parents helped them so much they appeared to be child prodigies. The great middle-class scam she and Lennox had also perpetrated with their own 2 daughters. That's what she was now, middle-class herself, in which case, middle-class is uber alles. Not gun-wielding, gum-chewing, coke-sniffing, up-the-duff scumbag gangster thugs. The sticking point was the hard-won Education Act of 1944 that made school free for all children. When push came to shove, she couldn't sell out on it. Unlike the colleagues who absconded to fee-paying vistas and returned to boast about the pleasure of teaching in a beautiful listed building that smelled of pine furniture polish rather than the odour of leaking urinals and industrial disinfectant. So when are you leaving this dump, Shirley? She did think of applying to a better-performing state school, the thought of being interviewed by a panel of strangers. She imagined their rejection letter. "Dear Mrs. King, we decided to make an offer to someone younger, prettier, slimmer, less experienced than a bitter old workhorse such as yourself who should be sent out to pasture henceforth. Yours very truthfully." Shirley realised that everything she'd ever wanted, she'd achieved, which hadn't got her prepared for rejection. Got into university when only the brightest kids did, got the first teaching job she applied for, found a husband she wanted when she was young. Her parents adored Lennox from the minute he walked into their house. Shirley, bring him over as often as possible. He still did the shopping, but only cooked at weekends. He was still a solicitor. They had sex on Sunday morning before they read the newspaper. They still fancied each other after 30-something years. He'd been a hands-on father to their 2 daughters, Karen and Rachel. Once the girls were weaned, he took them away for weekends at the seaside with her mother to give Shirley a much-needed break. She'd slept a whole weekend away, grateful for her mother's support. She and Lennox dutifully attended church for 5 years to get their girls into the Church of England's Greycoat Hospital School in Westminster. Karen is now a pharmacist. Rachel's a computer scientist. Shirley has come far enough for a second generation. Her girls have already gone further. Shirley's on holiday with her parents in their retirement bungalow, built on a small patch of family land, where they now live royally on British pensions. She feels another annus horribilis of a school year drain away as she sits on her favourite cane chair on the veranda. She has 6 blissful weeks ahead of her before returning to the hellhole high school for losers, where she'll handpick more pupils to mentor, as she has done every year since Carol left. Carol, who came from a single-parent family, didn't they all, who had such an exceptional grasp of maths, they hothoused her to sit her GCSE maths 2 years early, who was derailed by 3 girls who were the bane of every teacher's existence. Letitia Jones, Queen of Backchat, Chloe Humphreys, descended from a long line of career criminals, Lauren McDonaldson, who had an STD on account of her promiscuity with the older boys. Anyway, lo and behold, a miracle did occur. "Excuse me, I need to talk to you, miss." "About what?" "I want to do better, miss. Mrs. King. I want to work harder and go to university and get a good job and stuff." Applause! Lights! Hallelujah! Shirley made sure that the child was given everything she needed to do well, and because of her, the child went on to one of the top universities in the world. Carol reignited in Shirley the reason she went into teaching in the first place, the power of education to transform lives. Carol, her first and greatest achievement, never reported back as instructed. Not once. It makes Shirley feel, well, used. Winsome. Winsome is preparing a family favourite of roast breadfruit, fried flying fish seasoned with onion and thyme, with a side dish of grilled yellow squash. She appreciates healthy eating now she's back home, and eating food grown in her vegetable garden and fish caught fresh from the sea to her kitchen direct. Shirley, Lennox, and their Rachel and her daughter Madison are here. Winsome likes having her family around her. The French doors overlook the veranda where Shirley is winding down with a glass of wine while gazing dreamily at the sea. She behaves like a tourist when she's here, expects everything to be perfect, wears all white. It's symbolic of the psychological cleansing I have to undergo, Mum. Winsome is tempted to reply, "You mean it's symbolic of you not helping out around here?" She won't tell Shirley off, though. If her daughter gets upset, she'll never hear the end of it. Shirley, who's never satisfied with what she has, excellent health, cushy job, hunky husband, lovely daughters and granddaughter, free luxury holidays in the tropics every year. Tough life, Shirl. Compared to Winsome, who spent her working life standing on the open platform of a Routemaster bus. Winsome takes the fish out of the fridge, scales, fillets, slices it with her sharpest knife, runs it under cold water, dips it in white vinegar, rinses it off again. She herself is a grateful person. Grateful she has Barbados to return home to when her English friends had to spend their old age worrying about the cost of heating and whether they'd survive a bad winter. Grateful that as soon as she stepped off the plane, her arthritic joints stopped playing up. Grateful that the sale of the house in London allowed them to buy this one on the beach. grateful that she and Clovis, now in their 80s, have a reasonable pension as long as they stay parsimonious, which is true of her generation anyway. You get into debt to buy a house, not a new dress. She looks out onto the beach to see Lennox and Clovis disappear around the bend to where Clovis moored the fishing boat he'd bought second-hand and was patching up. Both men have broad backs, strong legs. Both have easy barefoot strides in the sand and are even a similar shape these days. Clovis has shrunk a little height-wise. Lennox has expanded a little width-wise. Winsome still wants him. Not Clovis, but Lennox. She tells Shirley she's lucky to have such a husband. Shirley replies he's lucky to have her as a wife, which is typical of her. Rachel comes into the kitchen with Madison, all sleepy-headed, who shuffles over for a hug. "Tell me about how you and Grandad met," Rachel asks her out of the blue. "I want to know your stories to pass on to Madison when she's older, Nana. I want to know what it was like when you were a person in your own right." Winsome likes the fact that Rachel is curious to know who her grandmother was when she was a person in her own right, as she described it, except that she never has been. First, she was a daughter, then a wife and mother, and now also a grandmother and a great-grandmother. "I met your grandfather soon after I arrived in England in the 50s, Rachel, at a West Indian gathering in a pub in Ladbroke Grove. Our fathers were fishermen at Six Men's Fishing Bay back home. He was nothing like some of the white boys from home who went crazy and jumped from one woman to another, who left half-caste babies all over England. We married and moved into a room in Tooting, where we shared with a house full of other tenants. Then Clovis went and had the damn stupid idea that we use our savings and head off for the southwest of England. He'd heard it was warmer there, and he could find work as a fisherman. Clovis said he longed for the sea. What could I say to Clovis? A woman had to obey her husband in those days, Rachel. He thought he would walk into a job with his experience. Most people in that part of the world were poor. Why should they give work to a stranger, let alone him? Clovis did get work, donkey work, as a stevedore in Plymouth. He got on with the other stevedores. Many were former seamen who didn't think he'd dropped from Mars. I was left alone with the children all day and evening. I was the one to find a dead rat on our doorstep, live with the "go home" daubed on our front door until Clovis painted it over. I was the one who had to spend my evenings alone and scared they were going to throw a petrol-soaked rag through the window. However, Rachel, if you stay somewhere long enough, people will get used to you. Mrs. Beresford, an elderly widow who lived a few doors down, was the first to have a proper chat. She introduced me to Mrs. Wright and Mrs. Missingham, both from the local church. When Tony and Errol started at Everdeen Primary School, they came home in tears because kids called them sooty. One time I saw two older boys jump Tony, who fought back, my brave boy. The headmaster grabbed Tony by the scruff of his blazer. The two bully boys laughed, walked away scot-free. The next day I told Clovis, "You can stay here, but the mother of your children is returning to London with them." It's quite a story, Nana. You were a trailblazer. It was just two people who went to foreign, Rachel. Nothing trailblazing about that. Winsome is distracted by the men who come back into view through the kitchen window. Lennox is more like Clovis than she likes to think, physically and temperamentally. Maybe that's why Winsome herself took to her son-in-law, a younger, sexier version of the man she married. When Shirley brought Lennox home for tea that first time, when they were students, Clovis ushered everyone into the living room, where they gawped over this young man over their cups of cocoa tea. What a catch he was. Lucky Shirley. She wished her body was as shapely as her daughter's, wished she'd had the education and choices Shirley had so she could attract a man whose goodbye kisses lingered a little too long, his soft lips full on, or was she imagining it? She reassured herself that her attraction to Lennox wasn't a betrayal of Clovis or Shirley because it wasn't acted upon. Until it was. Who was this woman who was letting her son-in-law do her every which way? Once a week and sometimes twice. On the weekends when they took Karen and Rachel to the seaside to give Shirley a break. They never spoke of what they did. It was better she satisfy him than he left her daughter for another woman. And then he left her, or rather, stopped it. No explanation, no discussion, no excuses, no compassion. Even now, so many decades later, she feels the old attraction stir when she catches him in a certain light. Shirley boasts that Lennox will never cheat on her. Winsome always replies she found one of the good guys. You lucky, Shirley. You're lucky. Penelope. Penelope's parents were dull and dispassionate automatons, crawling towards their death. She wrote in her diary at the age of 14. Her father, Edwin, was a surveyor born and raised in York, and Penelope wrote, a slave to routine, never said anything of import that had not been regurgitated from the Daily Telegraph. Her mother, Margaret, was also a dreadful dullard. She'd flagrantly smoked in public, hitched her skirts up above her knee. Penelope found it hard to imagine her mother had once been so rebellious. Felt sorry for her having to choose between career, she had wanted to become an elementary school teacher, or a family. Then came the moment they told her she was a lie, and any compassion she felt for her mother sank without a trace. You are not our daughter in the biological sense, her father told her at lunch on her 16th birthday. Great timing. She'd been left in a cot on the church steps, without certification, no note, no clues, nothing. It was quite easy to adopt back then. They signed papers, took her home. What they didn't add in that moment was that they loved her, something they'd never told her. Instead, they carried on as normal, even though tears were streaming down her face, passing the gravy, passing the pepper, passing the salt. To them, it was a normal Saturday afternoon. Later, when Penelope studied herself more closely in her dressing table mirror, it became absurdly clear to her that she looked nothing like Edwin and Margaret. Penelope decided she would go to college, marry a man who idolized her, become a teacher and have children, all of which would fill the gaping, aching chasm, the feeling of being unmoored, unwanted, unloved, no one. Penelope married Giles soon after she graduated Teachers Training College. He was already working as a civil engineer. It was all pretty perfect. His well-paid job moved them to London, to a grand house in Camberwell Grove, an otherwise poor area. She fell pregnant with Adam right away. A year later, Sarah wriggled out after a 12-hour labour. Penelope didn't mind staying home with the babies. She loved feeling in love with them. However, after 3 years, she was eager to start teaching to counterbalance her now rather unwilling role as Earth Mother. She embarked on a campaign to lobby Giles for her return to work. When she brought him his tea in bed every morning, talking at him when he spent too long in the lavatory. What are you doing in there? As she prepared his breakfast of eggs on toast, until one morning he put his fist through the glass window of the front door, shouting that she was lucky it wasn't her face. She got to keep the house, easily had custody of Adam and Sarah, found a childminder and employment at Peckham School for Boys and Girls, a new comprehensive down the road. She met husband number 2, Philip, 6 weeks after the Decree Nisi signalled her official status as available. Philip was a real catch, a brilliant psychologist. He wanted to know who she was, deep down inside. She was flattered that he should care so much. Philip was a man in touch with modernity, a new man, as she wrote in her diary. Until she noticed his benevolent probings had a tendency to turn into intrusive interrogation. However, she was resolved not to give up on number 2, until, unimaginatively, he traded her in for a younger version of herself. Penelope was left alone after Philip Le Creep had gone and the kids had grown and flown. She had the house to herself for a few years, found a wonderful African cleaner called Boomy. For the first time in her life, she almost wished she was the other way. Sadly, there wasn't a sapphic bone in her body. At first, she enjoyed teaching the disadvantaged children of the area, whose parents had an intergenerational history of paying taxes in this country, and didn't like it at all when the school's demography began to change. from predominantly English children of the working class to a multicultural zoo of kids. She learned the hard way to crush any opposition in the staff room to the ground, especially young upstarts like Saint Shirley, the puritanical of the Caribbean, as she described in her diary, who took a pot shot at Penelope at that staff meeting all those years ago. It took a long time to forgive Saint Shirley, but when she did, they became friends, work friends. Her daughter Sarah's family live in a second-floor flat in Brixton, which Penelope only visits when it's unavoidable. The white walls are covered with the children's cave paintings, and the furnishings are stained with remnants of food, regurgitated or otherwise. Once Penelope has lulled the twins to sleep, Sarah decides to tell her, because there never will be the right time for this, "Mum, we're moving to Sydney." Penelope's response is immediate, emotional, uncontrollable. Soon after, face down on her double bed, she hears her bedroom door creak open and Sarah's voice urging the twins to go on, go on. Their warm little bodies are soon crawling all over her. "It's all right, Grammy. It's all right. Don't be sad, Grammy." It dawns on her how much she's going to miss seeing these two little monkeys grow up. Megan Morgan. It's absurd that Megan's mother Julie treated her like it was the 19th century and not the 1990s into which she had been born. As Megan reflects with hindsight when she could articulate the unfairness of her problematic childhood to herself and analyse it once her eyes were opened by Bibby, who came into her life to make it all right. One example was that Megan preferred wearing trousers as a child, which really shouldn't have been an issue for a girl born in her time, but her mother wanted her to look the cutest of the cutest cutie pies. It was the defining aspect of Megan's early childhood. She didn't actually have to do anything or say anything except be cute, an end in itself, which reflected well on Mum, who could bask in the glory of the compliments that poured forth as validation of her love of an African man. Gigi, her great-grandma on her mum's side, was the only one who accepted Megan just as she was, allowed her to roam the countryside around her farm for the 5 weeks she spent with her every summer, until the year she turned 13. "You have to keep her where you can see her," Mum said to Gigi. "We've got to nip her tomboy tendencies in the bud." Gigi spent the rest of the week teaching Megan how to make Victoria sponge, vanilla slices, orange cheesecake. "There's no harm in learning how to bake," she said when Mum was present. When she wasn't, she said, "Let's play along with this for now, Megan. Next summer you'll be free to play out again." Mum was a nurse, Geordie born and bred. A bit Ethiopian because Gigi's mum was half Ethiopian, and a bit African-American because of her grandfather, Slim, who married Gigi. She looks almost white in a family that proudly got lighter with every generation, until she went and ruined it by marrying Dad, an African, fellow nurse, who loved her until she loved him back. Megan was part Ethiopian, part African-American, part Malawian, and part English, which felt weird when you broke it down like that, because essentially she was just a complete human being. She thought she would grow into her teenaged body, but it began to repulse her. At 16, she shaved off her hair. She felt free, weightless, herself. The girls she thought were her friends dropped away, embarrassed to be seen with her. "Why would you even do this to yourself? Are you crazy?" Gigi reassured her there was something wrong with a friendship based on having the right haircut. At the end of that school year, when her class was voting on titles, she won 2, the butchest girl in the class and the ugliest. It felt like the whole school was laughing at her. Megan walked out of school that day and into a job in McDonald's, devoured the free chicken legends, quarter pounders with cheese, Belgian chocolate honeycomb iced frappes, until she looked ready to pop like an inflated balloon. This was her life now. McStupid, McStuck, McForever. She snorted, injected, smoked, swallowed whatever came her way, whatever took her to a higher, happier plane, until she found herself sleeping with men who could provide it for her up against damp alley walls, behind warehouses, inside hallways. She slept with the women who took a liking to her, discovered she preferred them. One night, unable to sleep, Megan made the mistake of returning to social media to spy on her former classmates. Clubbing, partying, festivaling, being happy, with complexions filtered to perfection, waistlines digitally slimmed. And even though she knew a few of these girls were Annies, bulimics, had been bullied, were depressed, you'd never know it from their posts. It was still a wake-up call. Megan went cold turkey when her parents went on holiday to Mallorca, turned off her phone, flushed herself out with water, got the shakes, scratched herself raw, took enough painkillers to subdue the headache, but not enough to kill her. Went to sleep on day 9 and woke up, born again. On her 18th birthday, Megan walked into Tattoos for You on Nelson Street. She wanted a design that reflected the story of her life, flames to show the world how upset she was and to really piss her parents off, which it did. Her mother couldn't get over the tats. Megan came to the conclusion she was never to find herself if she remained living with her parents. Stay, we can work things out. We love you, we really love you, Megan. Talk to us. Too little, too late, Megan said. She'd heard that somewhere. She moved into a hostel with other teenagers. Over the next few months, she felt herself shedding layers of what had been imposed, hoping to reach the core of herself. She wondered if she should really have been born a man because she sure as hell didn't feel like a woman. She found sanctuary in chat rooms, discovered the trans world, sometimes saying the wrong thing, encountering someone called Bibby, who wrote back, "I'm going to hit the next person who confuses transsexual with transgender, I swear. People won't tolerate ignorance on here, love. Transgender people are only transsexual when they medically transition, okay? Been living on planet Parent, don't bite. BTW, just curious." "Ah, a sensitive one. I'll go easy on you from now on. Do your research, seriously." Megan told Bibby she'd thought feminists were synonymous with man-haters, although as she typed the words, she realised she'd never actually made up her own mind about it. "Oh, here we go," Bibby fired off. "Of course feminism isn't about man-hating. It's about women's liberation, equal rights and freedom from limiting expectations. You need to think for yourself instead of parroting the patriarchy. Time to grow up, Megan." "I just want to be myself, Bibby." "Wow, talk about low ambitions. Don't you want to change the world?" "I want to change my world first, Bibby. One step at a time." Like. Smiley face. Megan studied the photo of Bibby more closely. She was Asian, 20s, thick black hair, serious expression. Attractive. Very. Bibby lived in Hebden Bridge, had grown up in Leeds. She worked as an administrator in a care home after getting a degree in cultural studies at Sussex. Chosen to be as far away from her parents as possible, who really didn't get that she was a girl in a boy's body, who kept his alter ego inside his bedroom until he started to venture to the local shops in dresses and makeup. In a Hindu community where everybody knew everybody. You are no longer our son, and let's get one thing straight, you will never be our daughter. Bibby felt she had finally got the body denied her at birth. What about you, Megan? Where do you stand with all this? Time to spill the beans, love. Megan replied she was working it out. Genders like trans female or trans male and non-binary made sense to her. Others like quiver gender, polygender, static gender just confused her. Bibby, by the time I finished travelling into the batshit crazy end of the transgenderverse, I was stressed with a capital S. I call it the translooniverse. Bibby messaged right back. How dare you disrespect trans people's right to self-define? You sound like an ignorant oppressor. Don't come into our world and make fun of us. There was total silence for nearly 4 whole days. Megan worried she'd lost her, didn't want to be the first to make contact. Bibby did. 3 simple words. We should meet. Megan and Bibby had their historic first meeting in Cafe Nero in Newcastle Station, planned so either party could make an easy getaway if they loathed the sight of each other. They talked until their nerves jangled with caffeine, and later in a wine bar they held hands over the table, amused when others did a double take. Was that a man and a woman, or two women? The conversation continued on the journey back to Bibby's rented cottage in Hebden Bridge later that evening, with its sagging 17th century beams and subsided floor, where Bibby said Megan was welcome to stay as they went in for their first kiss on the double bed. Hebden Bridge, short walks to the Calder Valley and Hardcastle Crags, where they rambled for hours, happy to be away from the human race. Megan said, maybe she should become a missionary of the gender non-conforming crusade going forth to spread the gospel that gender is one of the biggest lies of our civilization. It's to keep men and women in their place, she shouted out to the landscape. Her voice echoed back from the valley walls. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? They held hands, where they felt most safe doing it, in the middle of nowhere. Morgan, no longer Megan, has identified as gender-free for 6 years now. They've learnt to be cool with it when people don't use or understand their preferred pronoun, they. Initially, they wanted to punch their lights out. They're leaning on the wall overlooking the River Thames outside the crowded after-party of The Last Amazon of Dahomey at the National Theatre, written and directed by none other than Amma Bonsu, the legendary Black Dyke theatre director. Morgan wanted to have at least a couple of meaningful convos with the natives, but so far they've not said a complete single sentence. Morgan has escaped outside, lit a roll-up, a glass of pretentious fake champagne in hand, no down-to-earth beers or lagers. They've only been here a few hours and are already missing the north, where people are more genuine, friendlier, and don't put on airs and graces. Londoners think they're the centre of the bloody universe, keep up their relentless unfunny jokes aimed at the peasants who live up north, and are generally intergenerational, unemployed scroungers. Morgan badly misses Bibby too. After 6 years together, the two of them are in sync with each other's rhythms. Every other weekend they visit Gigi from Friday night to Sunday morning, help her out with stuff around the house and farm, go on long walks. Gigi can't get a handle on Morgan's gender identity. Understandable when she spent 93 years living on the same remote farm. Gigi's incredibly fit for her age, incredibly stubborn, won't move out of the farm and into a home. I was born here, and I'll bloody well die here, and anyone who says otherwise can shut off. Morgan and Bibby worry about her. The last time they visited, Gigi said she'd changed her will and left it to Morgan. Invite all your non-binding people to come and stay and be themselves if you like. Why should I give it to my bairns when they'd have estate agents poking around before I'm cold in the grave? Morgan recently arranged an ancestry DNA test for Gigi, which links people with blood relatives who've also had it done. Gigi talks a lot about her own mother, Grace, who'd not known her father, a seaman called Wold from Ethiopia. Wold, who stopped off in South Shields in 1895 and impregnated Daisy, her grandmother, before buggering off. Which is what Morgan will shortly do from this awful after-party. They were asked to review the play for a fee for a lifestyle magazine, Rogue Nation, on account of their Twitter following of over 1 million followers, which apparently turned them into an influencer. She has already posted her first comment on the play. Just seen hashtag The Last Amazon of Dahomey at National Theatre, OMG, warrior woman kicking ass on stage, pure African Amazon blackness. All hail hashtag Amabonsu, book now or cry later. Peoples. Morgan takes a last drag of their third roll-up, stubs it out, will slope off to get the first train out of the smoke, when they see someone familiar standing talking to a black bloke they recognise off the telly. It's the kid from their lecture last year. What's her name? Yaz, popping up again at the National, rescuing Morgan from feeling isolated. Turns out she's the daughter of Amma Bonsu. Fancy me bumping into MX Morgan Malinga. How cool is that? Wasn't the play great? Have you met my mum? She's the queen of the old dykes. What do you mean you're just leaving? No way, come inside. Let's hope the Prosecco hasn't run out because all the old pissheads are here, and trust me, they don't know when to stop. Hattie, Gigi to her descendants, age 93 and counting, sits at the head of the banqueting table in the long room of the Greenfields farmhouse built over 200 years ago, her ever-growing gene pool crammed all the way down it. Either side of her are her two children, both in their 70s, Ada May, named after Slim's mother, and Sonny, named after Slim's brother that got lynched. Then there's the grandchildren. A few of the great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren are seated at a separate table. Everyone is digging into Christmas lunch. Mars-mildewed tapestry of the house dominates one wall of the room. The blackened flagstone fireplace dominates the other, big enough for a person to stand in when it's not lit, which it is, flames hungrily attacking the air. Gigi likes to walk barefoot inside the house, even in winter. It's one of the secrets of her long-lasting mobility, keeping her toes spread and her feet grounded, same as all the other beasts of nature. Presents are piled underneath the tree, people giving each other things, for the sake of it, nothing to do with religion. Christmas should be called Greedymas. She hasn't bothered with presents since Slim passed. Hattie sits quietly, quite content to be left to her own devices, nodding off, until people prod her to see if she's all right, the equivalent of checking her pulse. She's sure they're disappointed when she wakes up and shouts, "I what? I what?" They keep pestering her to go into a home and sort out her power of attorney. She knows full well it means giving them power over her life. Far as she's concerned, at her age, death won't be prolonged anyway. One bad fall, and she's a goner. If they try and force her to leave, she'll say, "Just a moment while I go into the loo." Once inside, she'll blow her brains out with the pistol Slim kept from the war. They'll find her brains splattered on the toilet walls. They won't forget that in a hurry. Most of them don't deserve to inherit, anyhow. Can't be bothered to visit from one Christmas to the next. Her grandchildren all look more white than black because Sonny and Ada May married white people. She suspects they pass as white, which would sadden Slim if he was still around. She doesn't mind. Why wear the burden of colour to hold you back? Great-granddaughter Morgan and Bibby, her partner, as they say these days, stay until New Year. She likes their company best. Hattie was never going to have a problem with Morgan being that way. But a while back, Morgan took it to extremes when she declared, "Gigi, I no longer identify as a male or a female." Hattie asked her outright if she'd been to see a doctor because you sound mental, dear. Morgan didn't say another word. Her and Bibby left a day early. The next time Morgan showed up, 2 months rather than 2 weeks later, a big sulk even for Morgan, Hattie sat her down and said, "Just be who you want to be, and let's agree not to talk about it." Nothing's changed about Morgan since she became a gender granary, non-binding what's-it-other, then changing her name from Megan to Morgan. At least she didn't name herself Reginald or William. When Hattie looks at her children these days, she sees a pair of crippled wrecks who rejected life on the farm where they'd have been fit in body and mind. She admits it was tough for them growing up. Ada May and Sonny got shoved down into mud once when they were young at the winter fair. The culprit disappeared into the crowd. If it had happened on the farm, she'd have gone after the bastard with an axe. Slim was less sympathetic. "Rise above it," Slim said. "It's teasing, that's all. If someone attacks you, you attack them back and move on. You all ain't living in the segregated society I come from. You all ain't got a 15-year-old younger brother called Sonny who was soaked in coal oil before he was strung up on a sugarberry tree and set alight while still alive. So Negroes, please, hold it down." Hattie asked him to tone it down. It was scaring the children. "We're a million miles from America and it's different here, Slim. Not perfect, but better." He said the children needed to know the history of a country that allowed their uncle to be murdered. They had these conversations until she was able to see things from his point of view. When Ada May and Sunny were 16 and 17, they announced out of the blue one breakfast that they were leaving home. Hattie remembers it so clearly. London didn't last. They didn't even make it 3 whole months. Lightweights. Hattie was happy when they settled in Newcastle, only 70 miles from the farm. When she first saw him, Slim Jackson reminded Hattie of the Maasai warriors she'd seen in a National Geographic magazine. She met him in 1945 at an afternoon dance in Newcastle for a demobbed American Negro regiment who were due to be sent home. Slim approached her to do the foxtrot. He was the first man to make her feel ladylike instead of like a workhorse who spent all day getting dirt under her fingernails. They married within the year. Slim came from sharecropping stock. His people farmed land but never owned it. Now he was married to Hattie. The land he worked on was one day going to be his. Hers too, she reminded him. She kept farm production going well into her 80s. It's only in the last 10 years it's been reclaimed by nature. 8 monarchs have been on the throne since the first stone was laid by her ancestor, Captain Linnaeus Rindale, in 1806, who returned to the district with his young wife, Eudor, from Port Royal in Jamaica. When Slim first saw her portrait in the library, he said, "She's one of us, Hattie." After Hattie's father, Joseph, died, Slim broke open the old library cabinet when he couldn't find the keys, found old ledgers that recorded the captain's lucrative business as a slave runner, came charging like a lunatic into the kitchen. "It's not me or my pa personally responsible, Slim. It's come full circle, hasn't it?" Hattie knows about secrets. Never told anybody about the child she lost, the one she gave birth to when she was 14. Boys paid no attention to Hattie at all, so when one did, there was no question she would refuse his advances. She was the centre of his universe for about 40 minutes. That day, Pa came into the bedroom to see Barbara, his grandchild, for the first time. He said the baby had to go. "You don't speak a word of this to anyone, ever, or men will have 2 reasons not to marry you." Hattie's still got the pink and blue blanket Barbara was wrapped up in. She kept her word to Pa and never told anyone. Grace. Grace, Hattie's mother, came into this world courtesy of a seaman from Abyssinia called Wold, who sailed into South Shields in 1895 and left a few days later, leaving behind the beginnings of Grace hidden inside her ma, who'd just turned 16. "He was very tall, walked like he wasn't touching the ground, like he was from another world," which he was. "One day we'll take a boat to Abyssinia and find him, Gracie." Daisy had given birth to Grace, a half-caste. Her father said he'd never live the shame down at the pub. "Give the bairn up to the church or you'll not stay," he told Daisy. Daisy moved out, found a job making artificial flowers for a hat factory, carried Gracie everywhere in a sling because there was nobody to leave her with. Daisy, who didn't reckon on starting up a wet, hacking cough when Grace was 8, was diagnosed with tuberculosis and was taken to be quarantined in the sanatorium with immediate effect, until she drowned on the liquid and tissue sloshing about in her lungs. Mary took Grace under her wing. Mary, who'd been raised in the Northern Association's home for girls in the countryside, delivered Grace to the front door. "Bye-bye, Gracie. They'll look after you here and teach you everything you need to know." The last person Grace saw who knew her ma. The girls in the junior dorm became her friends. Grace did the best impression of Mrs. Langley, impersonating her hoity-toity posture, making the girls grip their aching stomachs in hysterics. At the very moment Mrs. Langley flung open the door and caught her, accused Grace of corrupting the others, demanded to see her first thing in her office. "You have too much personality," Mrs. Langley said from behind the desk in her office. "Too much personality is unseemly in a girl. You are not like the other girls here. You have to be on your best behaviour at all times because life will be hard enough for you as it is. Do you want me to send you packing? You'll likely end up in the disease-rattled environs of South Shields as a lady of the night working for the Mohammedans." Grace decided that she was going to put a stop to her personality once and for all. At 13, Mrs. Langley found employment for Grace as a maid for the new Baron Hindmarsh. Grace is shopping in Gillingham and Sons for material for a summer dress. She finds a chap has sidled up to her. "You must be the Lady of the Nile." "Aye, that's what you are," he says. She is ready to tear down his impudence for calling her a Lady of the Night. "Queen Cleopatra, the Lady of the Nile," which is quite different altogether. He's got the brightest ginger hair, which he tries to comb flat, a ruddy, friendly face. "Joseph Rindale," he says. Joseph had returned from the Great War with his body and mind intact to the family farm, Greenfields, to find both it and his father in decline. Joseph put the farm to rights. Now he was ready for a wife, for company, and to carry on the family line. None of the local girls appealed to him until he had seen her on the streets of Berwick. When he brought her to the farm through the bustling village on Saturday morning, people stopped and stared at this strange creature. When they heard her speak, they were surprised she sounded just like them, a local enough lass, and warmed to her. Greenfield's farmhouse was long, narrow, thatched and fusty. Grace told Joseph she'd do the housework herself. Called Joseph in to look at the result of her endeavours, who praised her on how refreshed the house looked. Old was replaced with new. They played Armstrong, Gershwin and Jelly Roll Morton on the new gramophone player and danced to them. She couldn't believe how much he loved her thick, coarse hair. She'd been embarrassed by it. She'd wanted to clear out the old cupboard in the library crammed with ancient ledgers. Joseph said no, he'd sort it one day and put a lock on it. He wanted at least 10 strong sons. Grace would have settled for 5. The first 2 to announce themselves were washed out in clots of blood. Then there was a boy who started cooling down. A few hours after, the midwife put him in her arms. Then came Lily. After 1 year, 2 months and 4 days, Grace woke up early as usual and went to Lily's cot by the side of the bed. Lily felt stiff, was cold, did not move, even when Grace held her hand, cupped her toes, rocked her. Joseph gave Grace no time. His only ambition was to ruthlessly pollinate her. Grace gave birth to another one. Joseph named her Harriet. "This one will survive, Gracie. I can feel it." She refused to breastfeed it. Flossie moved in, a nanny from Berwick. Grace dreamed of slicing her arteries to get rid of the pain. Joseph grabbed the knife. "Don't you dare, Grace Rindale, don't you dare." And when Joseph thrust it under her nose, she pushed past him. "You're a wicked woman, Grace Rindale." 30 months came and went. Grace woke up one morning for the first time since the child was born and didn't feel full of dread. She arose and bathed, combed out the tangles in her hair, dressed herself in proper clothes, walked into the kitchen, looked at Harriet as if for the first time. She was so plump and healthy with smooth, glowing cheeks. "I'd like to bake Harriet a birthday cake, Flossie, and you're to call her Hattie now. I've decided that Hattie suits her better." "Go and sit with your mother," Flossie urged. Grace read her stories from the fairy tale book. Flossie fed Joseph, who stood watching, as if he were in the Egyptian desert again, looking at a mirage. The After Party. Roland is the first to triple moi Amma when she makes her grand entree to the after party of the last Amazon of Dahomey in the lobby of the theatre. Her crescendo of chattering voices and clinking Prosecco glasses, stilled, followed by rapturous applause and "Bravo! Amma, bravo!" She looks simply spectacular in a figure-hugging wraparound dress, although she's gone and ruined the effect by wearing silver trainers. Ever the rebellious teenager at heart, or rather, au cœur. The play was simply wonderful, wonderful, Roland effuses. A 5-star review has already been uploaded online from one usually savage pitbull of a critic. Rightly so, the production indeed deserving of the highest praise, and a far cry from the agitprop rant of Amma's early theatre career. Although the mother of his only child, writer and director, and dear, dear friend, could have made her name when it mattered a long time ago, if she'd taken his advice and directed a few multi-culty Shakespeares, Greek tragedies and other classics, instead of writing plays about black women. The majority of the majority sees the majority of Les Negresses as an embodiment of otherness. Roland decided long ago to align himself with l'établissement, which is why he is a household name among the educated classes, where it counts. Amma, on the other hand, has waited 3 decades before being allowed through the front door. He slides away, leaving Amma to the radico-lesbos who still follow her around like ageing fangirls. He's collared by Chairman Mao Sylvester, with whom he is cordial at best, who resentfully admits that the play is Amma's best work yet. It's such a shame she colluded with them, the boring suits, who line the party perimeter. Representatives of the multinationals who beef up the theatre's finances, who stand apart, smiling awkwardly, desperate to be part of the lovey fun. Roland marvels that Sylvester has managed to make a stab at capitalistic corporate culture and the Tories within a minute of saying hello. Now it's his turn. The last Amazon of Dahomey is a tour de force, he says, although I would never use a cliché when talking about it on Channel 4 News and the BBC's Front Row tomorrow. Sylvester has never acknowledged the superb success Roland made of his career. It's willful avoidance on Sylvester's part and very undermining. Amma, Roland says, could have paid homage to the original Amazons, who were arch-enemies of the ancient Greeks. Perhaps the play could also have employed more techno-dramatic devices, such as holograms of the original Amazons of Greek myth, hovering as peripheralized spectres, thereby adding a more classical relevance to its thesis. We do know that such women existed in the region courtesy of bioarchaeological analysis of the nomadic Scythian Kurgans, which revealed the historical presence of warrior horsewomen. Roland pauses. He's done his research pre-performance, so he can pontificate about it post-performance. Sylvester lays a hand on his arm and says, "I'm not one of your starstruck students, Roland," and stalks off. Roland is tempted to shout after Sylvester that he should be bloody grateful that he, Professor Roland Quarty, has even bothered to offer up his insights free of charge when he's the one being paid $10,000 to deliver an hour-long lecture in American universities, more than you earn in 2 years with your outdated 97% tin pot theatre company, so you can keep your social conscience, comrade, because he has something far more powerful, and it's called cultural capital. Roland is, however, far too sophisticated to cause such a scene. He spots Shirley across the room, still attired a la Women's Institute circa 1984, dear heart. Dominique is here too, still divinely sexy in a dykey-bikey way, also being swamped by a group of drooling fangirls. Plus ça change. Roland wanders out onto the promenade overlooking the Thames. He simply adores London, and for a long time now, in the increasingly rarefied circles of his existence, the city loves him back. An arm slides gently around his waist from the side. It's Yaz, announcing herself in the nicest way possible. I was so worried the play was going to be awful and humiliating for Mum. You never know with her. We've been here before, right? She done good, didn't she, Dad? Yeah, she did. Are we proud of her? Yeah, dead proud. Did you tell her this? You know you have to. Several times. She's very needy deep down. This success will go to her head and she'll become impossible to handle, Dad. Impossible. Yaz is the reason he got his act together. Before Yaz, he was an unexceptional university lecturer who'd gone to a rough Ipswich comprehensive. With Yaz en route, he took stock, decided he needed to be a greater person for the child he consciously decided to bring into the world with his friend Amma. By the time Yaz was born, he'd begun writing his first book. His first book made his reputation. By the third, it was sealed. The university gig keeps him financially afloat between book advances. He doesn't mind giving the odd lecture to mature students, won't teach classes anymore, and as he's famous and on the telly, they can't make him. This part of London is so special at night, isn't it, Dad? Isn't St. Paul's so, majestic? Absolutely. It is majestic, darling. I think of it as the architectural heartbeat of the capital, dominating the skyline for hundreds of years. Before he's finished, Yaz is pulling away. She's heading towards the tattooed man, or is it a woman, standing alone, smoking, looking out at the river. Most people think he's remarkable, so why doesn't she, his beloved only child? All she has to say, and really just once, shouldn't be too difficult. You done good, Dad. Carol stands quietly in the noisy after-party in a far corner of the room, along with the other bankers and funders who, like her, look out of place in their smart business attire. This isn't her milieu at all, so she declined Freddie's invitation to do the rounds and get to know the lesbian thespians. She wishes she had his effortless social skills. Carol had been intrigued by the play. It was so odd seeing a stage full of black women tonight, all of them as dark or darker than her, at first, although rather than feeling validated, she felt slightly embarrassed. If only the play was about someone who represented legitimate success at the highest level, instead of lesbian warriors strutting around and falling for each other. There were also more black women in the audience than she'd seen at any other play at the National. She kept getting the Black Sisterhood nod as if the play somehow connected them together. It might be the Black Lesbian Sisterhood nod. Even the ones wearing head ties were wearing practical shoes. She stopped making eye contact and grabbed hold of Freddie's arm, who took it a bit too far and nuzzled her neck. Now, just as she's preparing to drag Freddie away from the party, a woman walks towards her whom she hasn't seen in... how long? Oh, crap. Oh, double crap. It's Mrs. King. She hasn't seen her since she left school at 18. What on earth is she doing here? Shirley is astounded to see her protégé on the other side of the room. She's astonished to see that Carol is no longer a grubby child, but elegant, beautiful, refined, even from a distance. It must have worked out for her then. Shirley feels a suppressed fury rise like bile up her windpipe. Without thinking, she gravitates towards her. "Mrs. King!" Carol exclaims, extending her hand rather regally. "You must call me Shirley, Carol. It's Shirley." It turns out she's a banker in the city. Shirley expects nothing less than that from this vision of success before her. "How are you keeping? You must be retired, I expect." "Not at all. I'm not that old. Still teaching, for my sins, at the same insane asylum." Shirley throws back her head in a guffaw, expecting Carol to join in, who instead looks aghast. There's an awkward pause, during which Shirley feels a menopausal flush drown her face in sweat. What on earth must Carol think? Carol wishes Freddie would whisk her away. Therein follows a silence so long it becomes excruciatingly embarrassing. "Well, it's nice to see you after all this time, Carol." "Yes, nice to see you too," Carol replies and looks into Mrs. King's eyes, expecting a devilish glint. She looks sad, hurt. Does Mrs. King actually have feelings? Carol needs to make amends. "I know it's rather late in the day, Mrs. King. Shirley. I'm not sure I ever thanked you for your help when I was at school." "Well, better late than never, huh?" "Don't be silly," Shirley replies. "You've absolutely nothing to thank me for. I did what I did to help you out. It makes me happy that it worked out for you. That's thanks enough in my book." Carol sees that watery eyes have filled with actual tears. It dawns on her that Mrs. King really did help her when nobody else could or would. How could she not have realised this until now? Mrs. King takes a step backwards, embarrassed by her vulnerability, Carol suspects. "I must fetch my husband, or we'll miss the last train home. School tomorrow, Year 9, the worst. Goodbye, Carol. It was lovely to bump into you." Shirley walks back through the gathering, lighter on her feet. She can't wait to tell Lennox about her encounter with Carol. Just as she is thinking of finding Amma to say goodbye, she sees her heading towards the ladies with Goddess Dominique, giggling conspiratorially. Amma insisted there never was an attraction between her and Dominique, yet Shirley never understood a friendship where you went to the toilet together in your 20s, as they did, let alone in their 50s. She watches the two friends disappear into the ladies, so confident, fun-loving, youthful and flamboyant. She wanted to say goodbye to Amma. They've hardly spoken all evening as she's been swamped by her admirers. Shirley isn't venturing into the toilet to intrude on her gossipy catch-up session with Dominique, who'll give her a look that says, "What is it now, boring Cheryl?" Shirley can't wait to get back home, to snuggle up on the sofa with Lennox and catch up on the Bake-Off finale she missed tonight. Amma is crouched against the wall at the far end of the ladies' corridor at the National, keeping a lookout, while Dominique expertly cuts several lines of coke on her travel mirror. It feels like the old days when they'd sit and have a waz in full view of each other, continuing whatever conversation they were stuck into. "Here, ruin the lining of your nose with this." Amma snorts 2 lines up a nostril. As it hits the spot, she closes her eyes to savour the moment. "Remember, this used to be the first night ritual for our plays," Dominique says as she suctions up the rest of the powder. Dominique showed up unannounced at the stage door to surprise Amma after 10 sleepless hours from LA overnight, then an Uber from Heathrow to the National. It's been a long time since Dominique's been to any of her friends' first nights. The party outside is full of people she hasn't seen in ages. It was great to see them again. She delves into her knapsack on the toilet floor, extracts a black and white photograph, passes it over to Amma. "Remember this? Thought I'd bring it to show how far you've come." "Of course," Amma replies. "How could I forget? Just look at us, standing on one of this very theatre's exterior balconies. Dominique wearing a bashed-in trilby, ripped t-shirt, jeans. Anna in a bomber jacket, rah-rah skirt. The pair of them scowling and sticking 2 fingers up at the theatre's thick black lettering high above them. Look at you now, Ams, at the top of your game, my girl. You're a powerhouse. As for the closing sequence of the play, Afro-gynocentrism caused a femquake tonight." Amma feels herself melting against the wall as the flattery seeps into her. This is just what she needs. Everything is perfect. Just perfect. Epilogue. Penelope is hurtling towards her 80th birthday in 2 days' time, while hurtling north on an intercity train. She's trying to read the culture pages of the Telegraph and has come across a 5-star review of a play about African Amazons at the National, her favourite London theatre. Rave review or not, she'll be giving that one a miss. She's travelling first class, wants to enjoy her G&T and salted snacks in spite of her high blood pressure which is probably going through the roof right now with the rabble around her. The class of people who upgrade their tickets on the train for a few quid, howling brats, drunken beer revellers, and the worst offenders, people having very public conversations about private matters on their mobile phones. She wants to tell them all to shut the hell up. Penelope finds she has a little less tolerance for people these days, except for Jeremy, her partner, who rescued her from the spinsterhood she'd enjoyed for far too long. She met Jeremy at the Tai Chi classes she started in her late 60s with the lovely Dr. Lavinia Shaw, sadly retired, a Nigerian man replaced her, had recommended to improve her sense of balance because she kept falling over. The last time was in Waitrose when she hurt her shoulder so badly it took years to heal in spite of steroid injections. "You'll end up in a wheelchair, Penelope." Point taken. Penelope first tried a local Camberwell Tai Chi class where she was surrounded by impossibly thin young women and beautiful young men with strange samurai-style top knots who were after the women. She found a more suitable class in Dulwich proper as opposed to East Dulwich, where there was an impressive supply of older gentlemen of a certain ilk, including the one she began to station herself beside, Jeremy, with silver hair and an aristocratic mountaineer face, very Ranulph Fiennes, a few years older than her and divorced, quickly ascertained, best to. She positioned herself next to him in class as the teacher instructed them to part the wild horse's mane, grasp the bird's tail, and carry the tiger over the mountain. Penelope saw off all the competitors, reviving the somewhat rusty skills she'd employed as a teenager to ensnare her first husband. Sat through numerous ghastly operas with him at the Royal Opera House, English National Opera, Glyndebourne, Grassington, as if enchanted by the caterwauling on stage. She joined him at Lord's and Oval cricket matches and sat through innumerable and interminable said matches, acting very interested, helped along by the regulatory Pims in an ice bucket. It was her duty to uphold such traditions. Penelope turned herself into a fun person. With Jeremy, she became an attentive listener, offered soothing assurances, especially when he described his ex-marriage to Anne, who'd gone from a well-behaved mother and wife in the 50s and 60s to a man-hating feminist in the 80s who picked fights with him and disappeared to Greenham Common with women who tried very hard not to look like they were. Women she brought into their townhouse in Kennington as friends, until one day he caught her at it in their bedroom, doing something only a man should do to a woman. Well, feminism has a lot to answer for, Penelope said in commiseration, quite prepared to betray the cause if it meant finding personal happiness. Jeremy Sanders, MBE, had enjoyed a distinguished career as a civil servant in the Palace of Westminster, in charge of in-house publications, regardless of which political party was ruling the country, as he often joked. GSOH, Jeremy. They were politically aligned, right of centre, enjoyed debating the main issues of the day: the small state versus the nanny state, law and order, nationalism, immigration, discouraging social welfare, human rights, tax breaks to big business and big earners, the protection of personal wealth. Her Camberwell villa, bought for a shining halfpenny in the 60s, was now worth 7 figures. Penelope only allowed things to get intimate with Jeremy when they'd known each other 18 months. Her thighs, chunky and pockmarked, were no longer the streamlined contours of old, and she'd spent sleepless nights wondering if she should dye her lady garden for him. When they did consummate the union, it happened quite unexpectedly, when they ended up at it like teenagers on the sofa in the drawing room of his townhouse one night, after she'd endured 3.5 hours of La Traviata at the Royal Opera House. Penelope discovered then that Jeremy's feelings for her blinded him to her physical imperfections. He loved her just as she was, no complaints. "You're how I imagine Botticelli's Venus might look in middle age." Middle age? She was 70 at that point. He was so compassionate. She certainly loved him as he was, neither Michelin man or aging Adonis, a walker all his life. His legs were his best physical feature. Once all matters of compatibility had been determined, it made sense for her to move into his. They settled comfortably into life together, frequently dining out, neither cared to cook, regular visits to National Trust houses, theatre productions and West End musicals for her, and of course, the opera. She survived a cancer scare that made her feel incredibly mortal and grateful to avoid a mastectomy. In contemplating her demise, however, she found herself suffering restless nights about her birth parents. Who were the people who brought her into this world only to give her away? Sarah was quite surprised to hear her talk about this during their weekly England-Australia Skype conversations. "What's brought this on, Mum?" Sarah's middle-aged now, her visits to England infrequent, her children all grown up and very Australian. Penelope is still very close to Sarah, who told her about the availability of ancestry DNA testing, which is very popular in her part of the world, because so many people from there have roots in Britain and elsewhere about which they know little or nothing. "It will at least tell you which part of the UK your birth family came from, Mum." Penelope was keen on the idea. She'd been raised in York, imagined her ancestors were from that region, going all the way back to the Stone Ages, probably. Except it didn't quite turn out as expected. Now Penelope is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, because yesterday she went online to check her emails after her traditional Friday lunch of penne and pinot, and there it was. She found it hard to take it in at first. So many different nationalities, a collision between who she thought she might be and who she apparently was. Penelope went straight to the drinks cabinet. A few hours later she made it to her bedroom to lie down, relieved that Jeremy was out all day golfing in Surrey with Hugo, his brother. Being Jewish is one thing, but never in a million years did she expect to see Africa in her DNA. She imagined her ancestors attired in loincloths, running around the African savannah, spearing lions, at the same time wearing yarmulkes, eating open-topped rice sandwiches and paella, and refusing to hunt on the Sabbath. At least it explained one thing to her, why she tanned as soon as the sun hit her skin. Only 17% of her was British, which was a terrible disappointment. She was actually more Irish than British, which in all likelihood meant her ancestors were potato farmers. The Scandi element was all right, as long as she was Viking, but how to tell? Europe West must sure explain her great affinity with beautiful Provence. Her African ancestors were probably nomads roaming over the continent, killing each other before the British demarcated regions into proper countries and thereby imposed discipline and control. Penelope Skyped Sarah with the news. It was the early hours in Australia, but this was an exceptional moment. Sarah asked for the link to the site because, Mum, you aren't making a lot of sense. Have you been drinking again, Mum? Only a little. Within minutes, Sarah was back on Skype, saying the website also connected her with relatives who had also done the test. How on earth did you miss this, Mum? Okay, deep breath. Are you ready for this? You have over 100 genetic relatives listed, no one under siblings or grandparent, but something else is showing, Mum. A parent. Do you see what this means? They last logged on 2 weeks ago in Yorkshire and, wait for it, there's an email link for you to get in touch with them directly to find out more. Mum? You've gone really pale. Oh, God, I'm so sorry you're upset. Don't cry, Mummy. I just wish I could hug you right now. Look, I'll handle it. You go and sober up and we'll talk later. Sarah emailed somebody called Morgan, who replied almost immediately that she, was managing the DNA test for their great-grandmother, Hattie Jackson, in order to find out more about Hattie's own mother, Grace, who was half Ethiopian. The last thing Morgan expected was an email from someone who claimed to be Hattie's daughter, because Hattie only had one daughter named Ada May, who lived in Newcastle. Morgan promised she'd call Hattie right away and get back. After Hattie had recovered from the shock, she told Morgan she'd given birth to a girl she named Barbara when she was 14, who was taken away from her by her father a few days after birth. Hattie had kept it a secret all her life, thought of Barbara every day, and couldn't believe she was alive. Morgan emailed Penelope that her great-grandmother was in shock. She was very old. You must come soon. Penelope replied she was taking the train up the next day. Penelope takes a black cab from the station. She's usually a meter watcher. This one can rack up £1,000 and it won't matter a bit. The taxi driver says the journey will take over 2 hours. He's African, which isn't quite what she expected to find so far north. She's practically in Scotland. He makes her feel like she's back in South London. Then she catches herself. It's not as cut and dried as it was before. He could be a relative. If there's one thing she's learned in the past 48 hours, anyone can be a relative. The car travels deep into the Northumbrian countryside. She feels like she's going to the end of the earth, while simultaneously returning to her beginnings. The taxi passes through another deserted village, then the car climbs a hill so steep and long she's worried it won't make it up. At the top there's a sign above a high metal arch. Greenfields, founded 1806 by Captain Linnaeus Rindale and his beloved wife, Eudor. They pulled into a yard so thick with mud, the taxi has to slow down and trudge its way through. Mud splattering on the windows. It's like stepping back to pre-civilization. An ancient sagging farmhouse to her right, with a patchwork roof of mismatched tiles and mismatched bricks with vines creeping up it and out of it, looking as if with one hefty push it will all come tumbling down. A few chickens are squawking around, a cow's head is sticking up out of a pen, a plough is rusting at the far end of the yard. Everything is falling apart and ruined and running riot. She disembarks from the taxi and pays the fellow the £300 on the meter, plus a tip, considering he's practically a sixth cousin or something. A farmhouse door opens and someone steps out into the yard. Her hair is wiry grey and shooting up all over the place. She's wearing raggedy blue overalls with a cardigan over them. She's barefoot in this place, in this mud, in this weather. She's old, bony, looks robust. is tall without being hunched, quite fierce. Is this where Penelope gets it from? Her imperiousness as she's been accused in the past. The woman is unmistakably a light brown, the sort of colour that could place her in many countries. This metal-haired, wild creature from the bush with the piercingly feral eyes is her mother. This is she. This is her. Who cares about her colour? Why on earth did Penelope ever think it mattered? In this moment, she's feeling something so pure and primal, it's overwhelming. They are mother and daughter, and their whole sense of themselves is recalibrating. Her mother is now close enough to touch. Penelope had worried she would feel nothing, or that her mother would show no love for her, no feelings, no affection. How wrong she was. Both of them are welling up. It's like the years are swiftly regressing until the lifetimes between them no longer exist. This is not about feeling something or about speaking words. This is about being together.